Many of you know, but maybe some of you don't know, how important and influential Marshall McLuhan was. And what always strikes me is how many people outside of North America, in Europe, in Latin America, mention Marshall McLuhan to me when I travel for various reasons. And he's very quotable, as many of you know. And so if you look up Marshall McLuhan quotes, there's some really interesting ones, including, "Diaper backwards spells repaid. Think about it." I was stumped by that one, I have to say. I had to think about it. But the one which really struck me, which I think is really appropriate for tonight, is we become what we behold. We become our tools, and then our tools shape us. And I think that is so apropos for our discussion tonight. So now, to start the evening, I would like to introduce Paolo Granata. Paolo teaches full-time at the University of Bologna, but he is here as a visiting professor and McLuhan Centenary Fellow at the McLuhan Center for Culture Technology at the Faculty of Information at the University of Toronto. He teaches cultural heritage management and media culture and public memory, and his main research interests include aesthetics, media theory, philosophy of teaching, museum communication, and contemporary arts. And he's written several books in Italian, so if you read Italian, I suggest you look him up and check his books out. He's also a very good friend, and I've known Paolo for a number of years, so we're super happy to have him here tonight. Let's welcome Paolo Granata.
Good evening, and welcome to the McLuhan Salon. With McLuhan Salon, the University of Toronto is stepping out the university and into the city to better understand who we are, what matters to us, and where we might go into networking and rapidly changing world. So the McLuhan Salon series aims at dissolving the boundaries between the university and the city of Toronto. So, in the 50s, Marshall McLuhan argued that the world was becoming a global village, right? That prescient vision became more understandable when the internet and the World Wide Web pumped up. So now, we take for granted that the world is a global village in somehow. We take for granted that we live in that kind of digital village today, but that village is still unknown in somehow. So I'm gonna introduce our two guests. The first one is Gabriella Coleman. Gabriella teaches at the McGill University. So she was trained as an anthropologist, but she explores the intersections between cultures of hacking, politics, cyberculture, and focus on socio-political implications of the free software and the digital movement known as Anonymous. I will also point out that Gabriella is on the board of Equality, which is an international group of activists standing together to defend the human rights and freedoms in the digital age. She's also in the board of the Tor project, a free software and an open network to protect privacy and defend against the network surveillance, and also in the National Center for Women and Information Technology, a non-profit organization working on to increase women's participation in technology and computing. So Mark Surman, Executive Director of Mozilla Foundation, a global community that does everything from making Firefox to taking stance on issues like privacy and net neutrality. Distinguishing features, his goal is not just making the health of accessibility of the internet a mainstream issue around the world. As Mozilla Foundation Director, he is committed to build the movement side of Mozilla, building alliance with like-minded organizations and leaders, and growing the open internet movement. Before joining Mozilla, he ran the Commons Group, right? A boutique consulting firm that provided advice and insight on networks, technology, and social enterprise to nonprofits and governments around the world. Let's get started with the conversation. As maybe most of you know, 2 days ago, a shocking news happened. Really, Gabriella?
Okay, great. We're going to get there. So first, thank you for inviting me. It's really wonderful to be here, and again, also to see so many people out here. One of the interesting things about the present moment is if we're rethinking the global village, in the last 5 to 10 years, computer hackers of very different sorts, from those that write free and open source software, to those that break into systems, to those that whistleblow, have become significant geopolitical actors. Hackers have always mattered politically, but never before like they have today. They can possibly change elections, for example, as we saw recently, and with massive consequence. It was quite a big deal that Obama, for example, kicked out 35 diplomats after claiming that indeed hackers working on behalf of Russia hacked into the DNC and leaked emails. Now, Obama also made very, very big news as well just 2 days ago by commuting the sentence of Chelsea Manning. Chelsea Manning, for those that have followed it, Chelsea Manning was one of the first whistleblowers to take advantage of kind of new digital capabilities in engaging in classic whistleblowing, but was also engaging in kind of mass digital leaks. And she turned over material to WikiLeaks, which included American diplomatic cables that were released. It included a video collateral murder that came from the Iraq War. She was sentenced to 35 years in jail, and just recently Obama commuted her sentence so that she should be out in May 2017. Now, even though she took advantage, again, of new digital conditions, in many ways, she's still a very classical whistleblower. She was an insider. She felt that there was wrongdoing. She knew about it. She had access to the information, and she took it and provided it to the world. But we have a new type of leaker, maybe whistleblower, and that is the hacker who is the outsider who perhaps thinks that there's some wrongdoing inside of a corporation and government, decides to hack into it and exfiltrate data. And Phineas Fisher broke in, took the emails, dumped them. And in the video, he says, well, it's not really going to have much of an effect. But in fact, in this case, it did have an effect. First of all, this is a journalist, another Italian, who writes for Motherboard, who says, before Phineas Fisher broke into the servers of hacking team, we already suspected, based on extensive and detailed research from Citizen Lab, which is a University of Toronto outfit, that they were selling spyware to oppressive regimes, but the hack gave us the ultimate proof. And then very soon after, hacking team actually lost its license to export this spyware. So it kind of had a tangible effect. Now, what I find really interesting is that we are seeing the proliferation of this modality of hacking and leaking. From 2011 to the present, there's slightly over 10 examples of hackers breaking into systems and leaking data. It's not always done for whistleblowing purposes. It can be done for manipulating elections or for unknown purposes. But the great majority of the examples have come from hacktivists. What I find fascinating is that although the technological possibilities have been in place for many decades to do this, prior to 2011, for over 20 years, I can only find 4 cases that are similar. And so really, we are at a new kind of threshold when it comes to this kind of new modality. And what's also interesting, and this is something that we'll talk about because I'm just wrapping up this brief introduction, is that a lot of personal information is released in these emails. Some of it is very politically worthwhile, some of it's very ordinary, and journalists and the public are struggling in terms of trying to understand how to make use of this data. Interestingly enough, prior to these hacks that have released these kind of large email corpuses, there have been a few examples of non-hacked emails or information dumps that have public interest information that were acquired through other means. The most famous of these is the Enron email corpus that was released through a legal case. And I'm not going to go through the other examples, but this is a very new thing that we're seeing today. So that's all I want to say as a kind of brief introduction to hacks, leaks, and breaches before turning it over to Mark.
Yes, Mark, you are director of Mozilla Foundation. Behind Mozilla Foundation, there is a philosophy of open source, of open culture, I will say. What's your part on this new digital scenario?
We decided we're going to get out of digital.
This is true.
No. Yeah, I mean, of course, we have an interest in this, and people probably ask the normal audience question: how many people in the audience have used Firefox before? So, I mean, you know us from that. Well, you probably don't. I actually have to ask the other normal question: how many people still use Firefox? It's probably a lower number. Yeah, so that's what's happening. So we're working on that. We're partly working on that with different software, but also at the core of why Mozilla was founded was not to make a browser and take on Microsoft, although I wasn't there at the time. That worked out well, and it helped break a monopoly that was taking the internet in the wrong direction. But actually, if you go back and look at the charter that was written, it says there in this little paragraph in an IRS filing document, we exist to guard the open nature of the internet. And really, that's what's at stake right now on many, many dimensions. We just released something actually this morning called the Internet Health Report, which is our first take at trying to get people to understand, we live in this digital ecosystem, and there are parts of it that actually are very healthy. I mean, I enjoy it. I think we all enjoy it. We've seen access and opportunity grow because of the internet in ways that we couldn't have imagined 20 years ago. But in many other ways, there's a growing set of risks and contradictions that, as somebody who stood for open source and open culture my whole life, and I get paid to do that, many of the things that we created in terms of the internet, either are eroding because the openness was taken advantage of in a way that's allowed people to centralize and monopolize information in ways we never could have imagined. I mean, if you think about the URL as probably the most democratic form of information distribution, certainly at any scale, ever. And then you think about apps, or you think about music, where there's 2 or 3 distribution platforms of any meaning for the whole planet outside of China. We've gone from the most democratic information flow to the most monopolized information flow ever in human history in 20 years. And so, that comes actually because it was, something which is unregulated, free to build on, and we're seeing some of the negative side effects, which is actually increased centralization. But I think, some of the other things we talk about in terms of threats to the health of the internet, what we stand for, is that as we move into living inside the internet in many ways, having it wrap around us, we're also at a place where we're much more at risk in terms of privacy and security and many of the things that sort of are underneath some of what Gabriella talks about. And one of the things about, in some ways why you've only got 4 before 2011 and then this slate since, is that what's actually happening online, the stakes have gone through the roof. I mean, it is all of our economy. It is all of our society. It is now our democracy, and it's our love lives and our personal lives, which is, what's kind of funny is, yes, it's true, many of the emails that get leaked are interesting. Many are banal. And many of them are also, kind of embarrassing or sensitive because we actually do freely live much of our lives online in a way that we haven't really thought about how the stakes have shifted. And we also haven't thought about how exposed we are. And I mean, it's amazing to hear that McLuhan clip. I haven't kind of thought about the masked man or whatever he's talking about, but it really is that has happened to us. And not only have the stakes for our personal lives and the economy and democracy gone up, but the surface area for attack or for whether it's for good reasons, of which many of the cases Gabriella is talking about are, or nefarious, which I think a very large number are, the surface area for attack is just massively expanding. If people were paying attention to the tech news in the fall or early winter, we saw something really interesting happening, which is Bruce Schneier, who's at MIT and writes about security, pointed out that another security journalist and then a number of other systems that help run the internet were attacked by a botnet, which of course is not news, happens all the time. Many of our computers get taken over by hackers and recruited as zombies to take down other computers, and that's a part of what goes on. It's certainly something you want to defend against, and it's a part of the security of the internet. The difference was it was the first botnet attack that we knew of that didn't recruit personal computers, but basically recruited basically dumb devices. And it's kind of debated, is it CCTV cameras or DVRs? But we're moving into this world of the Internet of Things, we're already in it, where it's not just our phones and our computers that are connected, but everything around us. And that is not science fiction, right? I mean, think about how many cars, how many Wi-Fi routers, how many cameras, how many everything have got some kind of internet connectivity. And what happened in that botnet attack was a set of these dumb IoT devices were recruited into this botnet, to be able to kind of create the kind of damage botnets do. And what was interesting wasn't that, it's that these things are typically far less secure, typically created by companies that have far less reputational risk for being bad at security, typically at an end point of the internet where they're hard to update in addition to there being no incentive. And he talked about it in a way that I found really helpful in relationship to many of these questions around what I think of as the health of the internet, that the security crisis that is growing right now is much like the environmental crisis in that the lack of security and the risks to our economy and to our democracies and personally are negative externalities that none of the people who create the risk actually have any incentive to address. Yeah. And so that's the kind of, the stakes are rising and the damage that can be done, and in some cases the good that can be done goes up. But I think we really are not at a spot as a society where we're grappling with how to get our heads around that in any meaningful way, and certainly in anything like the speed that is needed to deal with this kind of change.
Yep, yep. It reminds to me that maybe we were wrong. We conceived the internet as a utility, and somehow, instead, it is an environment in which we live. Internet is not about the world, it is the world. So we are inside. So according to McLuhan's legacy, we talk about media ecology, just to share this kind of awareness. And McLuhan was aware about that. So without conceiving the internet as a separate, a different world, it's all around us. We are inside, we are embedded, right? And things changed rapidly. For instance, whistleblowing changed under digital and global conditions, right? Gabriella, how has whistleblowing changed in this new digital ecology?
Right. So first of all, yeah, it is absolutely the case that it's so much part of our environment and extensions of ourselves that it creates all sorts of wonderful possibilities, but all sorts of problems that Mark talked about. I think the interesting thing about whistleblowing is precisely well, there's two elements I kind of want to emphasize. Is that I think that from a kind of anthropological perspective, new templates get invented, and then they need to be spread very visibly before they get seeded, right? So if you look at the case of WikiLeaks, for example, WikiLeaks came into being in 2006. And they just thought, well, we can put information online and people will come and read, they'll be outraged, and change will happen. Well, you know what? People didn't even pay attention, right? They actually had to create a dramatic situation and scenario to draw attention to people. And actually, because there's so much content online, you really have to be quite good at drawing attention to your site, your issue, more than ever today. And that's precisely what they did in 2010 when Chelsea Manning gave WikiLeaks collateral murder. They changed media strategies. They edited the video. They held media conferences. With the cables, they partnered with traditional media, right? So in some ways, even though WikiLeaks, for example, enabled a new type of leaking to allow people to anonymously drop off material, I mean, that's very profound if you cut off the middle person. You know, I don't have to give it to Mark. Mark is a source of insecurity if he knows I leaked something to him. If I just leak something to the internet anonymously and don't tell anyone, I can really get away with it. That was quite innovative, but it didn't work until he kind of drummed up some excitement. And much in the same way with the hack to leak information, it was Anonymous, the kind of hacktivists who brought that into being. And they did so accidentally, and I won't go into the details. They were kind of enacting revenge against a security company who was trying to expose Anonymous. And when they were doing that, they entered the company very easily. They found emails. And they got massive media attention. It was through that massive media attention that the word got out. But it was really important that Anonymous used flashy videos and images to kind of, again, put a face to this phenomena. And again, I would say one of the huge challenges we're facing today is that there's wonderful whistleblowing, there's wonderful news, there's terrible news, but it's very fragmented, right? And to get people's attention for long periods of time, to get people to change their mind about an issue is incredibly tough. And it's only like the Trumps of the world who are able to currently command this sort of attention because they're just like so wacky. And I think one of the things we have to figure out is precisely how to work in this environment when where there's so much noise.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully that's not actually plural, the Trumps of the world.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Well, they might be. I mean, Le Pen.
Yeah. No, I know.
She's not quite like Trump, but
it may get there.
Right.
I think the thing to pull apart is it isn't. Of course, it is that he's wacky, that he's able to do that, and so it's one thing that stands out in this particular media ecology. But it is also really interesting to look at what are the tactics that were really, I think, quite skillfully deployed behind that wackiness. Mm-hmm. And the degree of nefariousness versus just kind of smart like a foxness is hard to, we may never know. But it is worth pulling it apart because it is a part of understanding what's going on right now is that there was a very calculated piece to that. And so, whether it is, choosing Twitter as the way really to root around the traditional media. I mean, I'm old enough and studied media early enough, to kind of had read about how television changed politics. And I think we saw in a way that really had not happened yet how the internet changed politics. I mean, certainly there was, we talk about Obama in 2008, using digital organizing and getting the grassroots out and all of this, and the internet was changing organizing. Yes, but I mean, that was still kind of Saul Alinsky with a big email database. And what we saw is very different now was Trump literally rooting around and then controlling the traditional media. I mean, I was in the gym the other day. I don't look like I go to the gym. But I was in the gym the other day and was amazing how, we used to kind of make fun of journalists for like taking pieces of press releases verbatim and quoting them, in a newspaper article, and they just run screen captures of Trump tweets over and over and over again on CNN, and that's not even Fox News. And so like it's very smart and intentful. And then, if you go, and that's not the nefarious part. I mean, that's just the smart playing of politics and the media. If you think about, whether the fake news piece of it was calculated or not, there certainly are lots of evidence there are people who are just cynically making money off bullshit headlines. And that was a part of what happened. But it's also very clear there are people nefariously making money off fake news headlines. And then, of course, the hacking piece is another piece in terms of whether or not that had an impact, whether it's all of the Democratic committees and states that were kind of less covered in terms of their email databases being broken into, or the DNC emails and Hillary's emails. So that, there's a lot of intent. It's not just a loud guy.
No, absolutely. And I think another additional point that could be made through this example is oftentimes these new technologies, whether it's Twitter or let's just say the visual culture of the internet with memes, often get identified with very progressive causes. The Twitter brought the revolution in the Arab world. Internet memes is what powered the hacktivist movement Anonymous. And then here we see in 2016, Twitter being used by a presidential candidate, the internet memes being used by conservatives, fascists, the alt-right in very, very sophisticated ways, right? And it sort of is a good reminder that these platforms and technologies that often get tagged as being progressive, liberal, or left actually can be deployed by people across the political spectrum in very unexpected ways.
And I think, go ahead, Paolo.
No, I was thinking that maybe journalism changed because of this new hacks and leaks around, right? Journalism changed.
What's a journalist?
Journalism.
What was journalism?
Traditional journalism changed.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry,
right?
sorry.
Sure.
No, of course, I mean, it's changed completely to the point that you can make that joke. I mean, it really has. And I think same thing is true of journalism, and what you say is, originally, I was one of them. I was sort of, even before the internet, involved in a lot of citizen journalism, and the internet came, it's like, oh my gosh, look at this, all these people who have never been able to have a voice, and they can, cover the Arab Spring and talk about political movements that never get on. And it really has turned around that the citizen journalism almost becomes just multiple sides of the filter bubble, where people are in these politically reinforcing echo chambers that then have led to some of the kinds of outcomes that we've had, where I'm trying to find the right phrase. I want to say limited truth, but where really just things that fly in the face of truth actually sway elections because people are in these bubbles. I mean, it's completely changed.
Yeah.
I mean, another fascinating element too is, are there any journalists in the audience, or wannabe journalists, or ex-journalists, recovering journalists? Yeah. I've worked a lot with journalists, and I really admire them quite a bit. They have a really tough job. I actually wish they got paid better and had a little bit more time. But one of the things that fascinated me when I was working with them is just how afraid they were of being scooped by another journalist. So they're very secretive, right? And yet in this era of the big mega leak, we saw with the Panama Papers, where you had 100 news organizations working together to get this project out. And I think that in the future, precisely with some of the mega leaks that we're going to see, I think journalists are trying to understand how best to get through that data, how to craft an interesting narrative story. And I'm not so sure the Panama Papers was entirely successful. It was out there for a little bit of time, but then kind of vanished. Yeah. I think the Snowden files, on the other hand, were quite successful, and there was a very interesting media strategy, and it was multiple organizations, The Guardian, The Washington Post, some independent journalists, right? And they really strung out the leaks for a long period of time. A news establishment, The Intercept, was born from that, right? But we're in a transitional zone, so it's hard to say what is going to like shake out and fall, stabilize from this, although certainly there's tremendous sea change because of the digital conditions or the size of the leaks. Again, I think that there's a lot of solutions that still have to be implemented, but I'm so glad that kind of laissez-faire attitude is one of the past.
Yes, thank you. So, thank you. Thank you for your conversation.